It is my hope that this event will come up with concrete strategies that can still be used to address the multifaceted challenges that women continue to face as they aspire for political leadership. The Zimbabwe Gender Commission is established in terms of Section 232, paragraph C, and Section 245 of the 2013 Constitution, and is operationalized through the Zimbabwe Gender Commission Act. Among its functions, the Commission is charged with monitoring compliance to gender equality provisions in the Constitution and other regional and international instruments which Zimbabwe is party to. In terms of women's political participation, the country has a sound constitutional and legislative framework which provides for gender parity in all spheres of life. Section 17 of the Constitution provides for gender balance, while Section 56 provides for equality and non-discrimination. Section 67, it guarantees women's political rights, and Section 80 of the Constitution reiterates the right of women as a collective to social, economic, and political rights. All these constitutional provisions clearly support the equal participation of women in political and other decision-making positions. Further, the National Gender Policy acknowledges that sustainable development and good governance is dependent on women taking part in all decision-making processes. Hence, it identifies gender, politics, and decision-making as one of the key policy strategic areas for achieving gender equality. At regional and international level, Zimbabwe is party to various regional and international instruments, which include the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the Protocol on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, the Solemn Declaration on the Gender Equality in Africa, and the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development. All these instruments acknowledge the need for equal participation and representation of women in decision-making positions and call upon member states to ensure that the establishment of supportive structures and institutional mechanisms to guarantee an even playing field for men and women in the political sphere. Key achievements in Zimbabwe in the legislative framework, whose instruments guarantee women's rights to equal participation and representation in leadership. Most of the instruments cited above have been domesticated. Perhaps the greatest achievement is the National Constitution adopted in 2013, which repealed any form of discrimination. Section 2 of this supreme law of the land boldly declares that any law, practice, and custom that is ultra-virus the Constitution is null and void. The Constitution upholds gender equality, diversity, and gender balance, among others, as key tenets of good governance. Zimbabwe also has adopted a gender-responsive programming approach where line ministries are also required to have directors of gender to coordinate work at that level. Mainstream organizations across the spectrum also have dedicated gender programs, as seen among commissions, where all of them also ensure gender equality and social inclusion. However, despite the elaborate legislative and policy framework, the status of women's political participation in Zimbabwe is quite disturbing. Statistics from the 2018 harmonized elections reveal regressing low women representation, with 31.5% in the National Assembly, which is 85 women, 60 of them coming through the quota system, making those directly elected effectively only 11.9%, and a mere 13.3% in local government, which means 267 women against 1,689 male councillors. For the Senate, the statistics are at 48%, 38% women against 42% male. And this is because there is a proportional representation system used for our Senate on a zebra basis. In 2018, only 6 young women under 35 made it to parliament, making it up only to 2.85%. Following the 2018 harmonized elections, Zimbabwe Gender Commission conducted a gender audit of the main political parties represented in parliament. The audit findings revealed that while all political parties have made effort to include women, some in the presidium as chairperson and within the leadership through the women and youth wings, all the political parties which were understudied are still far from achieving gender equality in practice. Even in their documents, recognize the needs to integrate gender. There's therefore still need to align party constitutions, policies, procedures, and practices to gender equality dictates of the national constitution. Further, the gender audit noted that the political parties covertly or overtly negatively influence women's participation through failure to recognize and address the unlevel playing field in the political arena. Political parties act as gatekeepers as they determine who can compete for political leadership and who can then be considered for appointment to the executive. And the male-dominated structures of the political parties are yet to evolve and become more inclusive. The audit also found that parties allocate constituent seats with minimum opportunities for women to win. Primary elections, a domain which still requires concerted research, also according to the audit, perpetrate discriminatory party procedures and practices, creating a hostile environment for women candidates. Finally, the audit also noted that the unequitable distribution of party resources among party structures and candidates. Further, the gender audit findings noted that of the 3 political parties audited then, as they were in parliament, ZANU-PF, MDC Alliance, and MDCT, the level of women's participation as candidates in the 2018 elections were as follows. ZANU-PF, 2,178 total, and 300, out of that 325 women, which is 15%, and 1,853 men, which is 85%. MDC Alliance, there were 2,154 total candidates, and 317 were women, which is 15% as well, and 1,837 were men. MDCT had 356 and 78, which is 22% were women, and 278, which is 78% were men. It is worrying to note that the same trends are likely to be reflected in the forthcoming harmonized elections based on the 2022 by-elections nominations and more recently, the primary elections that have been conducted. Other barriers to women's participation revealed through the gender audit include lack of financial support, negative cultural and social norms, lack of support for female candidates, gender-insensitive political party constitutions, policies and procedures, inadequate political networks for women, low access to information for women, negative portrayal by the media of women, violence including hate speech, cyberbullying, and physical and sexual violence, including sexual harassment. There's therefore an imperative need to address these challenges, limiting women's participation if we are ever going to change the narrative on the women's political participation. I'm, however, glad to note that we have a number of organizations who continue to champion programs aimed at capacitating women to assert their political rights. The Zimbabwe Gender Commission, in partnership with these like-minded organizations, in February, launched the Women's Charter for 2023 harmonized elections. The Charter is a legitimate call to political parties to consider a number of issues for women's political participation, which include increasing women's representation through enhancing intra-party democracy, review of political party constitutions to adhere to the 50-50 principle in the Constitution, addressing violence against women in elections, and ensuring equitable access to political party finance, among other issues. The Women's Charter was shared with political parties and duty bearers, and it is my hope that political parties will continue to make the Women's Charter a reference point as they prepare for the 2023 harmonized elections. We further acknowledge the numerous efforts made in building the capacity of women candidates and lobbying for gender-responsive political and electoral processes. We also note with appreciation the move by the government of Zimbabwe to amend the constitution to provide for the 30% reserved quota for women in local government. This will largely see the realization of more rural women participating in political leadership. We further appreciate the inclusion of the 10% quota for youth in the National Assembly, and we hope that gender considerations will be adhered to and have more young women included. It remains Zimbabwe Gender Commission's hope that all legislated quotas are within the statutory seats rather than as additional seats, based on the lessons learned from the framework under which the parliamentary quota has been operating. Whilst we appreciate the inclusion of the reserved seats for persons with disability in Parliament, the Commission is, however, greatly concerned with the insignificant and almost invisible representation of women with disabilities across the political divide. While currently there are 2 people with disability in Parliament, so at face value, 50% representation, only 2 people are grossly underrepresenting 10% of the population that we understand live with disabilities. As I conclude, let me reiterate that we cannot afford to ignore half of our country's population if we are to achieve our Vision 2030. Zimbabwe Gender Commission and other members of the national gender machinery are convinced that the electoral system of first past the post in direct elections will never deliver equality of opportunities and outcome in women's political representation under the patriarchal context. While women across the divide are motivated and eager to participate at party political and national level, there is no room for complacency. Since the Constitution already has a hybrid electoral system in which the near parity in Senate is a direct result, we strongly recommend including to Parliament of Zimbabwe the adoption of proportional representation. We are, however, confident that through a collective and collaborative approach, we are better positioned to tackle prevailing challenges faced by women, and we can therefore rewrite the gender equality narrative. My clarion call to every one of us gathered here today is for continued interface and engagement, including various political parties, to facilitate sharing of information, knowledge and ideas, and strategies that are critical in strengthening our effort towards equal participation of men and women in political decision-making. With these words, I wish you fruitful deliberations. I thank you.